What is going on, guys? Vigor Life Podcast is back. And looky who we have here. None other than my friend Alan Aragon, which listen, we have to catch up for a while before we even press record on this one, because it's been a minute, man. But it's such a pleasure and honor to have you on the show. After I said like this, it's probably been like 8 or 9 years since we had you at the event, at the Changing the Game event, man. But it's a pleasure to have you on. Welcome to the Vigor Life Podcast.
So great to be here, Luca. It's so great to talk to you. So great to see you again, man.
Hell yes, right back at you. And like I said from the get-go, I mean, look, let's keep it real here. Like, you're one of the top guys in the world when it comes to nutrition. What I love about you, obviously, is that not only is, things are evidence-based, and this is the thing that I'm going to riff on a lot today, is the practicality of it, right? Is where the research meets I would say, the coaching in the real world that helps people actually do the things. Because there's that part of it where it's just like, well, here's all the data and the science. And it's like, okay, look, but we gotta get folks doing this stuff so it changes their life. And the overarching, theme today, I really want it to be not only, I would say, look, the reality is most people to get healthier, they also need to work on their body composition. So we're going to talk about that. But I want to also dive into the health and longevity part of nutrition. And truth is, a lot of times, those things are very interconnected. Not always, but a lot of times they're interconnected. And I want to create a blueprint and kind of start from the foundation, almost like if we worked in tiers and said, okay, what are the foundations of what most people don't do? But if they did it, they'd be looking pretty damn good. Their performance would be pretty damn good, and they'd be pretty damn healthy. What is that kind of like bottom of the pyramid for you when you look at, like, and this tier one would probably be a bit generalized, but like that goes for everybody. But there you're like, hey, if folks did this, man, we'd be in a good place.
Well, really basic foundation stuff would be eat enough, but not too much, get enough protein, and get most of your foods from whole and minimally refined sources. And then maybe a fourth one to kind of put the icing on the cake would be to get a decent variety of those healthy foods. And so instead of sticking to like a diet of just a handful of things, so you can cover more of the nutrient spectrum. And so if people did that, combine that with a good training program and just something that they enjoyed, some sort of physical activity that they enjoyed, and just maintain that for a lifetime, then that's kind of the blueprint. That's kind of the recipe.
And so the first one I wanted to dive into is on the practicality side. Is, when you say, okay, eat, like, not eating too much, and how, because this is where it comes back to, and I have, like, I want to riff back and forth with you on this, because I do a lot of nutrition coaching when it comes to coaching somebody, how do they track it? How do they know? What's your experience, man, with, when it comes to macros or tracking in a MyFitnessPal or something else versus other strategies to, in some way track where you are and how you're changing things? Because that's where a lot of folks get stuck, right? Man, it's difficult to track. I don't want to do this. It stresses me out. What goes into that pool to help people find, what's enough calories, but not too much for them?
Yeah. Well, taking a couple steps back, if you're in a room of like 100 fitness professionals or 200, 300 fitness professionals in a conference, let's say, and then you ask the room, how many of you guys track your macros? How many of you guys track your macros and enjoy tracking it? You'll get them only a minority of the room, like raising their hands, And so you can imagine if you get in front of a group of lay people, let's say, randomly at like a park or a church or something like that, how many of you guys track your macros? You get like 3 hands for every 100 people. And so tracking macros and tracking stuff at that level of micromanagement is something that is pretty unnatural for most people, and most people don't like the idea. The only niche group of people who like the idea are folks who are highly oriented towards quantifying everything. I like to call them almost like fitness accountants. So you do have your group of fitness accountant people who love data, who love numbers, who love the small details, and they'll track all day, every day they've been doing it for years and they love it. However, the majority of folks, at best, what you can do is just explain to them that, okay, this is a phase of building awareness of what you're eating. And we'll do it for 2 weeks, tough it out for 2 weeks. And you'll gain an awareness of the caloric values and the nutrient values of the foods that you personally eat and in the serving sizes that you eat them. And once we gain that awareness, tough it out, and you can decide whether you want to continue with it or not. But for a certain segment of people who want to push the envelope with either performance or body composition, and they want to be on their own, they don't want to be coached through something, they don't want to have to depend on a menu, they don't want to have to depend on, hand holding from here to eternity. It actually is a good skill to have, to know that a palm-sized piece of chicken will get you 40 to 50 grams of protein, that sort of thing. A cup of starch, will get you like 50 grams of carbohydrate. Those kind of things. It is helpful for people to know, but I have to say, even if they don't know the gram values of stuff and they just have an idea of how much food portion wise is going to keep them consistent to their goals, they can learn it that way too. It's just less precise, less micromanagey, but there is a full range of ways that people can be accountable and still make progress. But and so the idea or the secret in quotes is finding what the individual clicks with in terms of their preferred approach to diet. Like some people hate counting grams and they'll do it for a week and then they'll hate it and they'll never do it again. Some people will love it and others will be much better with just very general guidelines. And if they can succeed on the general stuff, like have a significant amount of protein with each meal. Try to have vegetables once a day if you can. Try to have 2 to 4 fruits a day if you can. And the way that they know whether they're succeeding or not is on roughly a monthly basis, assess what's going on with body weight, body composition, if you want, and then just take note of the trends and then just adjust up or down from there. And so I think that when people can get into a routine, like this ironclad routine that consists of meals and snacks that they love, or at least don't hate, and hopefully they can even look forward to it, get into that routine and know how to switch stuff out within the archetypes of the meals, if you will. Know that a couple scoops of protein is the same thing as a freaking chicken breast in terms of protein grams. If you know that, then that can help. But if you just know basically, oh, well, my coach said that, if I miss this chicken breast, then I can just have a couple scoops of protein and I'm good on protein, then hey, then that's fine too. But the thing is, find the routine that you enjoy. And when you find that routine eating wise, all you have to do is eat more of it or less of it, depending on what your goals are. So people don't always have to track. Just find the meals you love, see how it affects your body composition, take a month to assess, and then adjust up or down from there. So it doesn't have to be this complicated thing where you're crunching numbers all day.
And a couple of things to unpack here. I think number one is just understanding, and from what you're saying too, like you're building a skill set, right? You're building a skill set, and you got a whole bunch of, I think for coaches, definitely, but for people, it's building a toolbox, because, right, one toolbox is, oh, we'll track it. Okay. But what if a person doesn't want to do that? And then you have portion sizes and like, hey, fistful of protein, you have plate sizes. I love, actually, this is one of the things I hashtag this on Instagram, bowl life, because like most of my meals kind of revolve around a bowl, and it's like, add protein, 40 grams, add starch, add a bunch of veggies, add sauerkraut. And it just, looks like compartmentalized. and it's so easy to do, because then it's like, okay, replace starch, replace veggies, replace it's like a drag and drop kind of thing in my head. But I look at all of those things as a toolbox, right? Like, okay, if I have, I mean, obviously the analogy, like if all I have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? Like, I think that doesn't work well especially with a wide population where folks are like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. But you keep bringing out things in a toolbox that support the principle. And the principle is like, you're going to need to eat less food if you want to drop body fat and weight. But the other thing, and I wonder what you think about this, because you said structure. And my thought around this has been that when people make a change at the beginning, I feel like it's very helpful for folks to eat the same foods. Because, and again, things that they like, love or like, and at least not hate, like you said, to get in the routine. Because I think if you get in a good routine, you build up, some wins and some self-efficacy and confidence around like, okay, I'm sticking to this pretty good. And then you can start adding in, I would say maybe switching some stuff up. Have you found that like do you recommend that to go like, hey, look, when you make the switch up to have less stress, just eat the same stuff?
Yeah, it definitely helps. It totally helps, because then what you do is you stabilize that variable. There's so many variables that go on in people's lives, and that's one of the things that confuses them and makes it tough for people to change their bodies. Like for weight loss, for example, they don't know whether they're eating more or eating less one day, or moving more or moving less the next day. Everything is haphazard. Just lock into a routine so you have an eye on what's going on with the energy coming in and the energy flowing out. Now, it's always going to vary day to day, but the trends and the overall picture, if you can just stay consistent, then that variation is going to be consistent as well. And so over the course of a month, you'll be able to know, is this plan putting fat on me? And okay, so if it is, then I got to make the programming decision of, do I need to move more, or do I need to look at my diet and see what I need to cut back on or cut out, or whatever is easier for somebody. Usually it's looking at the diet and seeing what you might need to reduce, especially if you're already eating foods that you love. I'm not a proponent of totally kicking foods out if you happen to like them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, but the main thing is that this is just for a reminder for anybody and everybody. It's very interesting because I had a podcast where I was talking about business, and it was, I went into like, you got to audit your time, and we all have to audit our time because we think we're super productive. And then we find a whole bunch of, fucking time that like, we're just doing dumb stuff. And it's like, oh my God, but you can only realize it once you audit it, right? Like with nutrition, like you got to find some type of way to audit what you're actually doing. What's the point A on the GPS? I think it's easier to find point B, like where do you want to go, right? But it's actually sometimes difficult to, look at the reality of what is point A. Same thing, your bank account, your time audits, your food. You got to create awareness around where you're at, and then get a picture of where you want to be able to move forward. I think that's really important. No matter which approach you take from the toolbox, it's got to be one of them. And this kind of brings me to part number 2, which, like, sometimes for me talking about it feels so redundant because we're fitness people, right? So if I'm talking to another coach, trying to tell them to get enough protein in is almost like the most duh moment of all time. But the thing is that you cognitive dissonance, right? Like you don't realize how I would say how much people undereat protein. And I actually don't know the current, like if there's any data around this, what the average consumption is of the average American. I'd love to hear it. But the thing is that when I moved in with my girlfriend, I was like, holy crap, like you're undereating protein, like on another level, and she's like, oh, I want to change this and that. And we're like, hey, you're eating this much, and this is kind of where you should be working towards. And this is why I was, even with coaching clients, but even somebody in my own life that I love dearly, I go like, wow, it's incredible how deficient people are in protein. Do you actually have any data around this? I'm personally like fascinated by this because it seems such a simple fix, But again, most people are just not getting enough protein in.
Yeah. General public in the US, the data on them, protein intake wise, is somewhere between 0.9 to 1.1 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. So that's the general population. They're eating about 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. And we know that the RDA, which is just a little bit less than that, 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, is insufficient for optimizing health, let alone performance and fitness and body composition. And so it's a myth that the general public gets enough protein. And the people who perpetuate that myth are basing that statement on the RDA. Because they're getting a little more than the RDA, but guess what? The RDA is about 50 to 100% less than what
I was about to say. Yep.
So yeah. And the elderly population, the older adults, aging adults, they are especially low on protein intakes. I mean, you see intakes like at and below the RDA on average for older populations. And that is particularly a bad thing because you're at a point in your life where you're really trying to rescue lean mass losses. You're really trying to hang on to fitness, hang on to strength, muscle mass. And underdoing protein in your older years is kind of the kiss of death for a lot of folks.
And does it continue to drop with older age too?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's because if you look at the pattern of the way that older people eat, they either have a typical breakfast that's maybe 10% protein of the 10% protein, or they will just kind of skip breakfast altogether, and then they'll have lunch, which will have a small-ish amount of protein, like 15, 20 grams maybe, and then they'll get the bulk of their day's protein in one meal, which is the dinner meal, in which they may have a piece of meat or whatever that'll run anywhere from 30 to 60 grams of protein, let's say. But by the end of the day, they're barely scraping the RDA, if they do at all. And that's a bad thing because the RDA, like we mentioned, it's about 50 to 100% below what optimizes health for most populations. And so the solution to that would be to just start getting the protein in at the first meal of the day. If you can, beef up the protein within the breakfast.
I love that you said that, but that's a lot of times, I mean, what you're hearing is it's not what a lot of folks are saying. And what I mean, look, is there's a lot of confusion going on out there, but again, why not? If that's, and I see exactly where you're coming from, because it's like, if this is a weak link, why, it's like eat the elephant, right? Like, why wouldn't you address the weak link first thing? And then you kind of got a head start on the race per se for the day when it comes to protein.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Like fitness people and people who are totally aware of their intake, nutrient wise and all of that stuff, and they just got a finger on all the variables. Fine. There are people who skip breakfast completely and they get everything in though by the end of the day. They'll get it in through lunch and through dinner. And they're fine. But you're talking about the general population who's just kind of living life, and they need to make these doable changes, sometimes small changes at a time. Just the objective of saying, hey, let's beef up the amount of protein you have at the first meal of the day. That can make a tremendous difference because they're not tracking their stuff throughout the day. They're not tracking anything. But in order to help that particular population, simply adding 20, 30 grams of protein to the first meal can make a huge difference in their ability to stay healthy and keep sarcopenia and even sarcopenic obesity at bay.
Man, what a cheat code right there. And because I'm actually a person that, and I always share this too, I would say for no scientific reason, where it's like, oh, I'm purposely fasting 16/8 or anything. Like I just hit the ground running. Caffeine, let's go. And like I love breakfast foods, but I tend to eat a late breakfast, like noon or 1. But again, I'm always like, hey, did I get my 180, 200 grams of protein in today? Like it's always there. But the reality is that for most people, it's not. And so And if anything, I will say this, as soon as, because we have a fit bar, it's like we have a smoothie bar inside of the gym. So when I come in here, I get a PB&J with extra protein, boom, that's 45. So there's that. And it's like, if you can start the day already doing something like that, that's super simple and easy, like you're ahead of the game. And there's now, because I read some, I know this was one study that showed, I think it was in two different groups in 12 weeks, that basically one group, they just said, hey, eat 30 to 40 grams of protein in every meal, in 3 meals per day. The other group, they said, just keep doing what you're doing. And the group that ate, so no, they had no other directions, no calorie restrictions, no food nothing. It was, everything else was the same. It was just like, hey, get 30 to 40 grams of protein in per meal. And that group over the course of 12 weeks ended up eating about, I think it was 440 calories less per day because of just nutritional displacency. And so there's so many benefits to the protein part that to me, when I start coaching people in nutrition, is just number 1 and 2 that you mentioned. Like, if they can do those 2 things, I mean, you're already so far ahead of the game to where you can control portion sizes in some way through some type of tracking and monitoring and get your protein in. I mean, like, if you could do that in year 1.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure, man. And a lot of times with a lot of people, all it takes is just getting them to gain an awareness of their protein target that they need to hit through the day. And once they have that awareness, it almost auto-regulates the other dietary variables. It almost auto-regulates the amount of total calories they need to consume, because a lot of people who are starting off with subpar amounts of protein intake, they also have subpar satiety levels, and they have very poor hunger control. And so once you increase protein to the level that it needs to be, which for most people is right around 1.6 grams per kilo of body weight, so double the RDA.
Yeah.
If you set protein at that level, then that automatically increases the amount of satiety that you walk around with through the day, increases hunger control, and ends up auto-regulating the amount of the rest of the stuff that you take in through the day. And there is a spontaneous decrease in total calories as a result of just increasing protein. And along those lines, there's a huge body of research on ketogenic diets. And a lot of the cases, the people who get on the ketogenic diet end up eating about double the protein than they used to eat before they got on the keto diet. And so a lot of the reason for the spontaneous total calorie reductions via keto is because people have doubled their protein intake as well. And so there is definitely a lot of practical effects of increasing protein intake that go beyond just getting what you need, supporting lean body mass. You're also regulating appetite a lot better.
Yeah. I mean, that's, like I said, that's a huge winner. Because again, like these are practical things. It's like, if you take anything from it, do this one thing, do this second thing. And like, if you keep doing it over the course of time, it'll change. I mean, it'll completely change your body composition. It's because, again, I think it's very simple to get bought into. I mean, if you're in social media and you listen to a podcast, there's always some angle about some type of diet or something different. And I'm like, man, these are the principles. There's different roads to get to that principle. Like, take one of them and just stick with it. And it can change the way that you look, feel, perform, your longevity and everything else, which leads me to like the third one that you mentioned, in, eating more whole unprocessed foods. And I know, like, you've always, I actually always kind of preach your 80-20 rule, which, and I'm always like, and if you know what, and if you want to get, more dialed in, go 90-10, but it's sliding scale. Don't ever go 100-0. Don't do that one.
We'll leave that for the competitive bodybuilders.
Yeah, exactly. But here's what have you found in a practical application of this? Because I find that, this probably is one of the more challenging ones, because, when you get somebody to like, hey, eat more fruits, eat more veggies, it comes down to like, okay, does that mean I got to cook more of this stuff? Like, what do I do with it? Like, I don't even like veggies, or I don't know which veggies I like. What's the practical application of getting folks to eat more of that in a way that's not, where there's not like crazy resistance, right? And
Yeah.
you can kind of slowly move along that scale of like getting to that 80-20.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, man. Like most people in the general public they're not even aware that your diet can still be healthy, even if 20% of it is from pure junk, you
Yep.
know? You have to kind of flip their perception of it. You have to say, look, if 80 to 90% of your diet is you're eating like a Spartan, then that 10 to 20% is not going to negatively impact your health. If anything, that 10 to 20% of, in quotes, indulgence foods or fun foods or junk foods, even if you will, that allotment will actually add to your quality of life psychologically, and it'll also enable you to better stick to your diet in the long term. And there's a lot of research in that vein, man, where they've even there's a really interesting study, I call it the bread study, where they took two groups of people, and one of the groups was allowed up to 3 servings of bread, like 3 slices of bread a day, and the other group was not allowed any kind of any bread, no, none of the starch group, or none of the grain group, the refined grain group. And so the 3 slices of bread group was able to not only stick to their diet better, but that they had better outcomes in terms of body weight loss and weight loss maintenance. So, and that's because there was kind of this light at the end of the tunnel. They were actually allowed to have some bread of all things. And we're not even talking about allowed to have ice cream or cookies. We're talking about bread. And there's a lot of people who demonize and vilify all types of foods, anything from bread to some people like demonize eggs, for example. You can't have egg. No, you can't have bread. You can't have this, can't have that.
Oof.
Fact of the matter is, dude, 10 to 20% of your diet, which for most people, it's going to be like, 250 to 500 calories or so from anything you want, cookies, ice cream, beer, wine, fried chicken, whatever it is. As long as 80 to 90% of your diet is from whole and minimally refined foods, then you will likely live just as long as anybody who tries to go 100-0, except you'll have a happier life. And you
kind of important right there.
Yeah. So that's the facts per the evidence. And even when you look at the longest living populations in the world, and we can look straight at the blue zones, they're probably the most famous populations in the world for longevity. So we're looking at the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California, the famous Okinawans in Japan, Ikaria, that's Greece, Nicoya, Costa Rica, and there's a 5th one that I'm not remembering at the moment. Sardinia, Italy. Those 5 populations, if you look at their diet, there is always an allotment of dessert, drinks, freaking, just nasty processed crap that you would caution people against eating. But they always eat a minority of that stuff. And the majority of their stuff is from fruits, vegetables, fish, various foods across the groups, whole foods. And gosh, even in Okinawa, Japan, they're eating pork and stuff. So the moral of the story is, you don't have to try to have this 100% in quotes clean diet to live a maximally long and healthy life.
Yeah, and I think that's a big if I had a party popper, I'd pop it, right? Because I think that there's always this I don't know, again, by working with people in the real world, you constantly see this whole thing where that people feel so guilty in doing it. And I've always said, structure it in a way that, for instance, I love popcorn, Reese's Pieces and popcorn. I know it's a weird combo, but I promise you, if you try it, you'll be like, it's the greatest thing ever. And, every time I go to movies, that would be my thing. In the evenings throughout the day, I eat, in line. And then at the end of the day, I'm like, I like true fruits or, dark chocolate and it's like, literally almost every night having that. And most of the people that I know that are healthy, they're lean, every single person has, what some would call indulgence in something. And, and the biggest thing is doing it with zero remorse, because it's part of your plan. It's like, no, this fits into my 20, or, maybe it's a part of the year where like, oh, I'm getting ready for the summer. And now it's 15, right, percent or 10% or whatever it may be. But to be completely guilt-free doing it because it's the plan. I think that makes it a big difference between going like, oh shit. I did something I shouldn't have done. It's like, no, actually you should do that, because we know just from that as the psychology of it. Like if I restrain you from something, you're going to want more of it. And then just pick what are the things that are worth it. Right. But what are the things that are worth it? Because sometimes, when you eat like a shitty dessert and you're like, oh God, I should have just stuck to the stuff I knew was great. But I think that's so important. And, that again, it comes to planning. And so this is my question too. I like to say that one of the most important habits is, kind of like plan, prepare, cook, just kind of like in business is like, know what you have to do the next day. That's the most important stuff. Tend to find that if people don't know what they're going to eat the next day, they're going to be in trouble if they haven't built that skill set up yet. Right. So for somebody that's been doing it for years, and yeah, for sure, like you can make decisions on the fly much easier, but somebody that's just changing their nutrition, wanting to improve it, have you found the same thing to where if people don't have a plan for the next day, that they tend to struggle? Like their default ends up being struggle?
They need a plan overall. And everybody's coming from a different place. People who struggle a lot with body weight, I found that they never prepare their own food. Like their diet is at the mercy of this restaurant or that. And that's pretty brutal. I mean, if you're going to depend on restaurant food for most of your intake, then restaurants are in the business of making sure you come back because the food was damn delicious. And so when food is damn delicious, they got to make it hyper palatable. So we're looking at double the butter that you would use at home to make your food, double the salt and double the sugar that you would use at home to make your food. So if you are one of these people who cannot and won't prepare your own food, then you have to be very, very discriminating about where you go to eat out, and be very discriminating about what you order. And you're going to have to live with the fact that if you're going to order the really great and rich tasting stuff on the menu, then you're walking a tightrope, you're taking a risk. But so for people who are willing to get into a routine where they're preparing at least some of their foods at home, then what you can do is just prepare just vats of food en masse. Prepare your protein, like whether it be chicken, fish, poultry. I mean, prepare a certain amount of them. This is what my wife does. She does a lot of times. She'll do just like a field of chicken, a field of freaking chicken drumstick, a field of chicken thigh and stuff. And the family just eats it. And then we just take what we need and what we know for each meal for like freaking 3 days. And it's a beautiful thing. It's easy for her. She doesn't have to cook every day. She doesn't have to, well, she does cook every day anyway, but she doesn't have to worry about, okay, how am I going to have the protein in place for the family? How am I going to have this in place for the family? And so a lot of times she cooks these just big vats of food. Sometimes they're separated, like, chicken, fish, poultry, and then the vegetables are made separately, and then et cetera. And sometimes they're all in one big like crock pot. I think that if people have the overall idea in the beginning that, all right, I want each meal to have a certain amount of protein. Now we're talking about the main meal. Snacks are a different thing. I want each meal to have a certain amount of protein and, if possible, a certain amount of vegetables. And depending on how much I'm trying to economize on calories, it's going to have a certain amount of starch. And when I say starch, I'm talking about the umbrella of starch foods, which include grain products and legumes and tubers. That's the starch group right there. And tubers, for those who haven't heard that term before, we're talking about potatoes and yams and certain types. And then legumes would be beans, peas, that sort of thing. And then the grain products are the grain products, cereal grains, basically bread, cereal, pasta, rice, that corn. And so if you have it in mind, each main meal should have a certain amount of those components, then you don't really have to worry about anytime you sit down to a meal, you don't have to worry about having planned it out too far in advance, because you can have your stuff on the fly. Now you're going to be caught out, let's say in an airport somewhere, or in a in between flights, or Lord knows where, you might end up at a gas station somewhere on a road trip. It helps to know, okay, how is this meal contributing to the total of what I need to accomplish by the end of the day? Mm-hmm. If all you have for a meal is let's say like a small bag of pretzels or chips or something like that, then you already can kind of know in your mind that, all right, this isn't fulfilling anything that I need for the day. If anything, it may be taking up some of that starch allotment that I planned for 2 of my meals today. However, I can make a decision of whether or not to eat it. So without complicating the answer too much, Luca, I think that when people know what their meals should look like, they don't necessarily have to have stuff planned too far in advance. I agree with you. It does help to have things stocked up. Like right now in the fridge, I can go grab a freaking palm-sized piece of meat and take care of a quarter of my protein for today, or right now I can go into the pantry and get 2 scoops of protein powder and take care of a quarter of my protein for the day. I think that having the stuff stocked up is a form of planning. And so if you have it stocked up, you're good.
I'm trying to always, as you're speaking, take mental notes on things I want to unpack, and a question I have for you. That's a big one that comes up for me too, from clients. But number one, I mean, my personal kind of story from this is I used to eat out a lot, just because, it was easy. And I'd have these spots where, I'm getting healthy meals. I'm getting my protein, this, that, the other. Pretty on point. But I was eating out a lot, like 2-3 times a day, right? Then COVID happened. I was like, all right, well, I'm going to have to start cooking in the evenings, right? And so I start cooking in the evenings. And 4 months in, I'm like, shit, I'm doing everything, training is very similar. Everything's pretty similar. What the hell did I change? Because I'm leaner and I look more jacked, right? So I'm like, oh shit, I'm only eating out maybe once, because I wanted to continue to support small business in this local area and do pickup and stuff. But like, I started cooking a lot more, then that's cooking, like me and my girls move in and start, she cooks a lot. And again, like the only difference is that I continue to go up the scale of cooking for myself or somebody cooking for me at home. And, visually these meals are very similar as far as size and so on and so forth. But the reality is what you said, is you have no idea what they put in the meals, in the food, how they cook it, because they want it to be tastier. Now, when you go to some of these restaurants, and they do display the calories, it's, the salad's 1,400 calories. I'm like, look, I know that my salad at home is like 6. So, it's double, right? Like it's double the calories. Or an omelet, right? Like, I'm doing a little oil, scrambled, sauteed veggies, and I'm like, how the hell is the omelet 1,100? Right? What are you putting in that sucker? Some Vinstrol? Like, damn, like, I don't know. So, but maybe you can't prepare 3 meals, but if you're eating all 3 out and you start eating 1 at home, that's a 33% change in your nutrition day, right? And then the second part, I think, would be to preparing even means like looking at the restaurant you go to or the cafe you go to and picking something ahead of time that kind of fits, the goal, and going in there and ordering that, rather than like, say after a meeting, I'm stressed out, I go to the, place that's the closest, and then I order kind of whatever, something that that just calms me down, right? Something sugary, something sweet. And so that was my point. But that brings me to the cravings part, because I mean, I think that the more you prepare, the less chance of cravings you have. But what are some of the things that, when folks are like, oh, I was going through my day, but I just had so much cravings and I had to snack on this and that and the other. Like, what's a process that you coach on to help people start having less and less cravings and just control, I would say in a sense, some of it's controlling emotion for sure, but, control the cravings to better be aligned with the nutrition is going to help them get results.
Yeah, man. The first thing for those is there's a couple things you can do. So the first thing for cravings would be to make sure that you have the foods that you actually crave. so if you crave chocolate, then make sure you include chocolate in the diet. If you crave like ice cream, hey, you can include ice cream in the diet. Now, of course, there are some folks who will stand up and get mad and say, hey, if I let myself have one cookie, I'll eat the whole bag. Well, my response is, okay, well, not everybody is you, and you might be that person who will eat the whole bag of cookies, but the majority of people simply don't know that they're allowed to have that cookie. So, the majority of people think that I can never have this cookie. So when they do have it, they subconsciously have this narrative in their mind saying, hey, you better eat that whole bag because you're going to try to abstain from this stuff for life. And the next time you have it is maybe like next year. So eat the whole bag. So that's that little voice in their head. And then they end up having the whole bag, where that little voice should be saying, this is no big deal. You can take it or leave it. You can have a cookie today, have another one tomorrow, have one every day if you want. You still live a long, happy life. So that is the narrative that should be running in the back of their minds. And so you can eliminate cravings by including the craved foods. Now, there are other people who will stand up and say, hey, man, like there's research showing that if you avoid certain foods, then the cravings for them go down. And I would say, well, yeah, that's true. That is true. But there's also research showing that when people binge, when people overeat, it is those exact foods that are binged on. So you have to take a step back and go, okay, well, how do we solve this problem? All right. For some people, complete avoidance. Okay, I'll give you that. For a majority of people, complete avoidance of certain foods is the way. But for the majority of people, teach them that, hey, it's just food. You can have it every day, but just moderate it properly. And then that removes the craving. So there's that approach. And then the second approach would be what I call the cock blocking approach, like just simply displacing stomach space with a lot of plain water. So you basically cock block the craving with a ton of water. Not a ton, literally, but if you have 2 tall glasses of water, then it kind of gets you back in touch with the stretch receptors, the sensors, like the sort of this gastrointestinal sense of fullness. That's just a physical stretching of the stomach. And that'll displace your wants and your needs for caloric stuff. And people don't drink enough plain water anyway through the day. And so doing that, like for example, if you are at a restaurant, what most people will do is they'll grab for the bread and butter. And what you can do is, instead of doing that, just have 2 tall glasses of water. I don't want to use the word force, but I'll use the word force. Just force 2 glasses of water. And then see if you actually have a craving for the dessert after that meal, where if you normally would, if you do that water trick, you won't. And there's a ton of data showing that drinking plain water prior to a meal will always tend to significantly decrease the amount of calories that you spontaneously eat, like after you've displaced that stomach space with water. So it's kind of a win-win. You drink more plain water, you eat less calories, and you have less cravings for whatever it might be. So if you have a craving coming on, slam 2 tall glasses of water and then reassess what you're craving and why. And then make sure you have your diet planned out so that you have the foods that you normally crave, but in these strategic and moderated amounts. Like me personally, I love peanut butter. I love chocolate. So what do? I buy the Trader Joe's Pound Plus. They have these blocks, man, of chocolate that are.
Well, you just go for the block. Forget about the small stuff. Go for the block, baby.
The block is hot, man. So I just, and it's pre-cut up into these squares. And so
okay,
I just break it up and put that chocolate in a jar, and I'll have like 2 of those squares of chocolate a day, and I'll have it with a teaspoon of peanut butter, and it's no big freaking deal. By the end of the day, I've racked up like, 300-400 calories tops of chocolate and peanut butter. And then the rest of my diet is freaking would make the Okinawans blush. They're like, man, I gotta raise my healthiness, my game up. And so and to me, I look forward to that. That satisfies all of my cravings. And I know that, hey, if I want to have it tomorrow, I'm going to have it tomorrow. And there are days that I don't have it. And the reason why is because I don't see it as a need. It's not a forbidden fruit that I'm subconsciously drawn to having, no matter what.
Yeah.
Ooh, I got to have a lot of this stuff. And you just kind of remove the power from the foods, and you should put the power in your own hands.
You actually answered the question before I was going to ask you that, when you started, talking about water and drinking that before. We mentioned protein. Like, protein does help solve that a little bit too, because of satiety. But I love the water because it's a simple strategy. One thing that I used to do, I don't do it anymore because I feel like I've got control of it, but I used to drink a protein shake before I'd eat food, like for instance, a dinner or something like that. And it would always, because I tend to like bigger dinners as is. And there was a time where I was still actually playing pro sports, and I was working on like, all right, I'm gonna get leaner, build lean muscle, but I got to drop some body fat. And I realized that like I would absolutely crush dinners, and I'm talking about just Viking savagery, like who knows how many calories I was taking in.
Yeah.
And I can't remember who told me. It was like, oh man, try drinking a protein shake. Before I was like, whatever, okay, that's just gonna add more calories. And I would drink the protein shake, and like halfway through, I'm like, man, I can't eat anymore, because I was just full. But I was obviously getting just a lot of protein with very, very little of anything else. I just had some fruit and I think a little bit of oatmeal. It wasn't like high on carbs or anything else. So I just had my meal, and I just could not eat as much. So finding, I think, these strategies that kind of tick the boxes, it's like doing that, adding water. I personally don't drink enough water, and it's such an interesting point. Last night, I'm like, oh, I'm definitely dehydrated, right? So bam, I knocked down a Catalyte Thorn, it's kind of like this recovery drink, and another glass of water. And I'm like, I am so full, right? And I just had a small meal, and I was going to eat more afterwards, but I knocked those 2 down. I was like, I don't even know if I can eat some more. So it's kind of like, how can you, simple things that fit you're solving 2 problems. You're hydrating, which people don't do enough of, and you're feeling more full. If you're craving and overeating, like it's going to help you with that. And so I definitely want folks to kind of like, hear that and go like, all right, strategy, put it in the holster, put it in the holster, baby.
There's a study, man. There's a study where they fed the subjects a whole fresh apple, like the equivalent of an apple, before each meal, and they significantly reduced the amount of calories in the subsequent meal, even more than the caloric value of the apple that they ate prior to the meal.
That's a great point. But actually, that was the note that I had in my head too. The fruit part. I've heard that, and I don't know if this is backed by a lot of research that came out about it, or it was more anecdotal that I've heard from a number of people that eating fruit throughout the day also helps with cravings, because there's some sweetness to it, but it's not calorically high, at least not most fruits. Plus, you're getting a whole bunch of nutrients that most people tend to be deficient in. Is there anything at least research based behind that, or is that more anecdotal? Although I do trust that. I think that's a good recommendation.
Yeah, no, there's definitely research behind that, to where eating whole fruit, it has somewhere between a neutral effect on body weight to a weight loss effect.
Mm.
And that's because when you think about I guess the three main things that would satiate somebody in the course of a day, you're looking at protein, water, and fiber. So fruit would be like a water and fiber combo.
Mm.
And so having that, and just plus the sensation, the mechanical sensation of chewing is actually satiating. So if you're not drinking down your fruits in the form of fruit juice, and you are actually like biting into an apple, or any fruit that you like. Some people like to discriminate and say, have these fruits but not those fruits. That's not a good deal. You should have the fruits that you personally like, because that's how you stick to a diet, and when you actually look forward to what you eat. So yeah, fruits would be a water thing, and in some cases a water and a fiber thing that would be augmenting the satiating effect.
Yeah, because the reason I bring it up is because that was actually been another questions on the snacking part. But if some folks have a lot of, I would say, trouble with snacking, and if they can snack on fruit instead of whatever else they're snacking on, which usually isn't fruit, which will be things like nuts, which can rack up calories quick, or sweets and chocolates and things of that nature. It's a better option. But what is your thought? Like, I don't know if I'm off here, but I think the average American is like snacking is 550 calories a day. It was some pretty damn high number, and it's success with our clients that we've had is going from, whatever amount of meals, whether it's 4 or 3, and just like, hey, just take the snacking out. Don't change anything. Just don't snack. And just month 1, you'll see like really good results. Like, holy crap, like, how's this possible? Because it's just not a thing that people remember. Like, I snack a little bit. What does that even mean, right? But when you look at the average amount of calories people take in, it's like you're snacking at a meal per day. Would you say like snacking is a thing you'd love to take out for almost everybody? Or what are some recommendations that if people snack and you keep it in there, what is your thoughts around that one? I'd really love to hear that.
Yeah. I think that just the general population, snacking in the general population is usually a bad thing, because they're snacking on chips, and they're snacking on high calorie, low nutritive value foods. The whole game changes if you say, hey, if you're hungry for a snack, eat a fresh fruit, eat a whole fruit. I think that's a whole different thing. So snacking is kind of a double-edged sword. So there's ways to direct the program productively and still give people, I guess, the permission to snack. There's the archetypical trail mix of freaking raisins and peanuts and this and that, and M&Ms. I mean, people think they're healthy eating fruits and nuts and stuff, but dried fruit and nuts is a good way to eat like 1,000 calories while you're sitting down.
You know how like this is, you might find this funny, because it's like in Europe, in Slovenia, they call those bags, right, where it's just like a whole bunch of nuts, raisins, maybe some chocolate.
Trail mix.
Yes.
Trail mix.
They call them in Germany, call them Studentfutter, which is like student food, right? It's basically like, I'm broke, but this will get you a bunch of calories.
Yeah.
It is, and I'm like, might be good for the student that needs calories, to get through the day and add calories, but it ain't. Put it this way, essentially what it's saying is like cheap with a lot of calories. So you don't want that. Okay, if your goal is I would say weight maintenance or weight loss or fat loss, that's probably not the best bet for you right there. I wanted to bring that one up because it literally says it on the back. It's like Studentfutter, so it's funny. Cool, but I'm glad you said that because there's, there is approaches where it's like, hey, maybe take the snacking out, but if you don't, here's some better options for it.
Yeah.
Now, I want to get to that to exercise more towards the end, because I kind of want to go to the tier 2, right? So if this was tier 1, and honestly, like tier 1, if you do those things well, you cover so many bases. Even again, for most people, the nutrient deficiencies that they have, if you do the things from tier 1, you're probably going to solve a lot of that. But what would be tier 2 for you? And tier 2, when it comes to not only like performance, but like performance, health, longevity. If people cover those bases, what's that next tier where they could take things to the next level?
Yeah. The next tier would be to tailor your diet more closely to your training goals. So, or even your body composition goals. So some people might have the goal of, for example, well, you've got fat loss and you got muscle gain. And those two tracks have specifically different programming objectives that you can tweak the diet better for. So with fat loss, it's or muscle gain, it's going to be a matter of getting the right amount of protein and calories. Performance is a whole other thing, but let's just look at the fat loss and muscle gain thing. So for fat loss, it's going to be a matter of making sure you don't have this tendency to overeat and you have to make sure that you keep a net caloric deficit in place by the end of the week. So people differ individually in how they prefer to achieve that caloric deficit by the end of the week. Some people are more inclined to run a pretty uniform caloric deficit every day. Like let's say a 300 to 500, 600, sometimes 700 calorie deficit, like every day. Whereas other folks do much better on a non-linear type of model where they're eating pretty much maintenance for most of the days of the week, but for a couple of days of the week, they'll drop really, far down low or even fast through a couple of the days of the week. So you've got to individualize the way that you achieve that caloric deficit by the end of the week, whether it's a more linear deficit or whether it's a more non-linear deficit. And there's ways to actually, not go as extreme as fasting, but there's ways to manipulate your carbohydrate intake to achieve that caloric deficit by the end of the week, without having to, micromanage and think, okay, I got to, drop 500, make sure I'm on a 500 calorie deficit every day for it. So there's ways of going about that. So when you talk about the second tier, it's a little bit more of a fine tuning thing on how you individualize the program for improvements in body composition. So, and on the muscle gain side, and I know that was just a really kind of high level glaze over overview, but we'll do the same thing for the muscle gain side. So for gaining muscle, the ideal conditions are a caloric surplus, or at least caloric maintenance, or a slight caloric surplus. And for some people, depending on their goals, an aggressive caloric surplus, if they happen to be, in quotes, hard gainers. So you individualize the surplus of calories per day in order to create in order to prime the physiological environment to be conducive to muscle growth. So the body cannot grow muscle from thin air. You've got to have the energy availability to do it. And there's other rabbit holes to go down in that direction, to where people who are closer to their potential for muscle gain will gain a lot of body fat if you make their caloric surpluses really aggressive.
Yep.
You have to keep their caloric surpluses like 10 to 20% above and beyond maintenance if you want to keep fat gain under control while they're gaining muscle. Whereas somebody's a total newbie, just started training, heck, you can do a 20 to 40% caloric surplus and just let them go and let them train. And, they'll partition that energy and those fuels properly towards the lean tissue, and very little, or sometimes even none. And sometimes they'll even recomp and lose fat and gain muscle at the same time if they're beginners or intermediates on their training journey. So yeah, you got to make sure that the surplus is there and in place and optimized towards the individual. And then we can go I guess that would be the tier 3, where you look at protein distribution and how to best position doses of protein through the day in order to maximize short-term responses in anabolism, like muscle protein synthesis, and then have that translate to, better gains in muscle over time. So there's different rabbit holes to go down with that.
And I'll give maybe an example, and you let me know if this is kind of like in line with what you're saying. And let's say that this is a drop some body fat, but try to maintain as much muscle as possible, and go, okay, I got like an insanely difficult training session on Saturday. In that training session, I'm going to have, a good chunk of starches with every meal. But then I got a day where I'm just doing really like aerobic capacity work to recover, and I'm not doing any carbs just until the evening. So my meal 1 and my meal 2 is protein, veggies, and some fats. And you're kind of distributing, like, the harder the workout, the more starches you do that day. Maybe you even have a low carb day, but just on the day you don't train, and then you have like a medium carb day on a conditioning day. But that way you're under in calories, right? But you're managing it throughout the week based on your training sessions to have more energy, and also to support maintaining that muscle that you got and not losing any of that. Would that be a good example for instance, that a fat loss phase, but maintaining muscle?
Absolutely, man. That's dead on. I mean, you can get to a point in your development, in your journey, where you're fueling for the work required. You're sort of fine tuning your intake with the demands of the day, and that's kind of the ultimate level to get to. Once you have gotten to know your body well, and once you've gotten to enough practice with consistency, then you can fine tune. And on days where it's like a moonlit stroll to just lying around the couch watching Netflix and stuff.
Yep.
Your fueling needs are going to be quite different from, let's say, other days that you mentioned, where it's a high volume training session, or just a high volume physical activity day.
This is actually something that you mentioned, and this is even in my own interest. I've been like diving into longevity stuff for quite a bit now. And then, my neighbor and one of my closest friends is Joel Jameson, who's obviously extremely geeky on the side of conditioning and is throwing himself a longevity. So every week we're having these conversations. And now you got this, I don't know if you've seen it, but Limitless, which is on National Geographic, that kind of 6-part series with Chris Hemsworth on health and longevity. And but
I only saw the movie Limitless.
Oh yeah, which is a great movie, by the way. And that's a great movie. But
yeah, I like it.
It's pretty cool. So basically what they did was, they got actually Peter Attia's on a bunch of the episodes and talking about longevity, and one episode's fasting, and then cold exposure, heat exposure, exercise, conditioning, pretty good stuff. But what I wanted to kind of dive into is, so because there's two kind of parts of this, right? You got fasting as a form of, I would say, a strategy. And yeah, go switch it up, baby. Let's go.
That's a squeaky damn chair I was on, man.
Good. So, fasting is a form of a strategy to obviously, cut out some calories. It works for some, it doesn't for others. I did it for years. And again, it works well with my schedule. I don't think it's, the most magical thing on the planet or anything else. But, now you also have this side of, well, it can be very healthy for longevity purposes. And also kind of, where does it fit into? I know this is a layer of questions, but I kind of want to move through that, like the metabolic flexibility side of things, the benefits of doing things fasted so that you can use fat more as a fuel source and carbs as a fuel source. And what are your thoughts around that? Both the side on longevity and metabolic flexibility. I really want to hear your thoughts on both of those.
Yeah. Okay. So I just wrote this monstrous paper on intermittent fasting, and we just published it within the past few days, actually.
Oh, cool.
Actually, what's the date today? Is it the 3rd? Yeah. Within the last week, we published it, and it's a free full text. So I don't know, maybe we could put it in the show notes or something like that. But intermittent fasting, from the standpoint of controlling caloric intake, is pretty obvious. I mean, it's an effective way to do that. And the beauty about intermittent fasting for controlling intake is that during the feeding cycles, you don't have to consciously restrict, because the fasting cycles are such a contrast energetic wise that they really offset however however people tend to eat on the feeding cycles. So intermittent fasting, to me, the beauty of it is the removal of having to purposely restrict on your feeding cycles. And that goes with intra-week models like alternate day fasting or twice weekly fasting, as well as intra-day models like time restricted feeding, whether it's early time restricted feeding or delayed time restricted feeding.
Mm-hmm.
The ad libitum element or the unrestricted element applies to all forms of fasting. And so that is the really cool thing about fasting. As far as fasting's special effects on health and longevity and on things like metabolic flexibility, that's controversial compared to their simple ability to control and mitigate the chances of excess caloric intake. So it's almost impossible to separate the positive consequences of weight loss and fat loss and controlling against excess intake from the specific benefits that might be inherent with prolonged periods of not eating. So it's difficult to disentangle the benefits of those things. So it's entirely possible, Luca, that the main benefit of fasting and in quotes, the magic behind intermittent fasting is its ability to enable people to eat less by the end of the day or the end of the week. And the reason why we at least it would speculate pretty strongly that this is the case is when there's a recent study done that looked at health indexes, cardiometabolic health indexes, like blood lipids, glucose control. I believe that they also looked at inflammatory markers, but I'm not sure. But they did look at cardiometabolic health parameters, and they used lean subjects. And it was an alternate day fasting model that they tested with a linear daily caloric restriction model. There were no advantages to the alternate day fasting compared to daily caloric restriction in lean subjects. And they were trying to isolate whether fasting had some special effects on these clinical indexes. And it didn't. And in fact, the people on the alternate day fasting routine, and they matched everything, calories by the end of the week, nutrients by the end of the week, they actually lost more lean body mass than the daily caloric restriction regime, which was kind of an unfortunate finding for people who like the idea of alternate day fasting. But the moral of the story of that is the leaner and more fit you get, the less of a benefit intermittent fasting has, and potentially the more of a risk that you're putting lean body mass at.
Great point.
As you maintain a fasting or intermittent fasting type regime, as you get into leaner body composition. And once again, the longevity question hasn't really been answered with fasting versus daily caloric restriction, like with intermittent fasting versus daily caloric restriction. So intermittent fasting versus regular habitual eating, for sure, intermittent fasting is going to cause better health outcomes, especially in people who need to lose body fat and body weight. But as you get leaner and fitter, then it becomes more questionable.
And you know what? I want to give just from my experience and some of my personal examples and with clients. But the way that I like to use, again, a lot of times it's a strategy. It's almost like a toolbox for me. For example, I'm a foodie, so I'll eat the same almost every day, but I like going out to restaurants with friends, trying new foods, whatever, right? And so if I'm on the road and Jay Ferrugia's like, I got 2 to 3 restaurants we got to hit today, we'll do that sometimes, by the way, right? And just crush them. And who knows how far we go over calorically. I already know I'm like, next day I'm fasting. Right. I might just do dinner. That's it.
For
You know,
sure,
and,
for sure.
and it, boom, and it's a strategy. Like that's, you know, it's like, hey, I'm going to level this out. You know, maybe it's such a crazy weekend. I might go Monday, Tuesday, just have one meal. Like, I mean, I've done that many times before, and it really just becomes a strategy to do exactly what you said before. Like you're closing the window automatically. There's no way I'm going to eat the amount of food that I would have if I had 2 other meals, no matter how, small or whatever they were. So I think that's a really, really good point, is to know, and there's a lot of ways to do it, right? Where you could go one day a week where you just do one meal, and the rest you restrict calories, but you're a little bit more, I would say, on a higher side, closer to maintenance. But then you go like, hey, on Sunday, I don't work out. I'm a little bit active, and I just have one meal. I mean, we could give templates for a lot of different ways to do it. I just want people to hear strategically maybe how this would play out, how it plays out with me. There's a lot of folks that, we coach and they go like, I really don't, I don't care for breakfast, as far as like eating in the morning. And then we kind of structure some stuff around, but they, some days they train in the morning, and I'm like, hey, you're going to have a hard strength training session. Like it's probably better that you eat in the morning, so don't fast. But hey, this day, like, all I want you to do is aerobic capacity work later on, and you're fine. Like, and again, it should be individualized based on people's lifestyles, people's, if folks are like, there's no way I can, not eat food. Well, that's probably not a good strategy for you to start off with. So I think that, again, it can become a great tool. But I also like that, you back it up with certain data to go like, look, just don't think it's the magic wand and it will just do a ton for you. And a great point on that, right? Like the fitter you are, the leaner you are. And if you want to maintain your lean body mass, that might not be the best strategy for you whatsoever. So that's a great point, but this leads me to, if, again, this is, I think, tier 2, kind of like tier 3. Okay. Metabolic, the conversation of metabolic flexibility. How important is it for folks, again, when it comes to the health side of things? Are there merits to doing things to go like, hey, my body is good at burning, I would say fat at lower intensities, and then burning carbs at higher intensities. And if you can't do that, I'm actually doing a DexaFit VO2 max test and testing this out for myself to see where I'm at. Doing a lot of labs and, kind of doing a little bit of a mini project with myself.
Okay.
Dive deeper and kind of share with people. But, where are your thoughts on that? Is that like a thing that people should look into more closely at all? Even like I said, if you're like, hey, I've already built a foundational level of leanness and health, and I want to take it to the next level. What are your thoughts about that?
I'm going to dive into that. There's something I forgot to mention that your answer just reminded me about. I have a client who has a couple of business dinners a week that are huge. I mean, we're talking appetizers, main course, drinks. And on those days, that's all he eats.
Yes.
And the following day, he'll have like maybe a couple protein shakes, because of just the scale of how much gets eaten and drank on those business dinners. so yeah, it is definitely a strategic thing that would work for a lot of folks, where intermittent fasting, in quotes, would just be like a strategy to fit in very large intakes of meals that you don't really have much of a choice in having, depending on lifestyle and stuff. So yeah, very good, very good. I'm glad that you brought that up. So as far as metabolic flexibility goes, the 2 ways that we know that increase metabolic flexibility, or in other words, like you mentioned, the ability for the body to switch between using fat for fuel versus carbs for fuel. So substrate utilization, so to speak, optimize substrate utilization. The 2 ways that we can increase it are physical activity, body fat loss. So whether or not training while fasted increases your body's ability to be more metabolically flexible, that's up for debate, and it's largely speculative. So if you take 2 people and get them to the same degree of leanness and, let's say, exercise training, fitness, whether it be endurance or whether it be strength or a combination of both. And you take one group and you do the things that are supposedly going to increase metabolic flexibility, like training fasted and or concentrating nutrient intake and carbohydrate availability
Mhm.
around high intensity output work, and removing carbs away from either non-activity or low intensity work. You take, you metabolically flexibilize one group, and then you take another group and make it totally linear, but
Yep.
you make sure they both arrive at the same level of leanness and fitness by the end of the trial. I honestly don't know, and I highly doubt that there'd be a metabolic flexibility advantage of the nonlinear group.
Yep.
And that's just based on the research we have right now. But I'm not opposed to the possibility that we could explore that some more. I try not to be dogmatic
Yeah.
about the existing evidence, just because, as the old cliche goes, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to stay open-minded to that. But if somebody truly wanted to increase metabolic flexibility, get leaner, get more active, and
Yes.
however way you plan on doing it.
Yeah, but see, I think that's a good point. Meaning, you can get there a bunch of different ways, right? Because I don't if people, there's folks that are like, hey, I just feel better if I do, steady state kind of aerobic zone 2 cardio fasted. Cool. Go ahead. Right. It's like, and I do it sometimes, not because I'm trying to test that. It's just, I have a horrible time doing any type of high intensity because I go hard in the paint. Anybody that knows, I train very hard in the paint. So if it's higher intensity, I got to eat carbs that day. Lower intensity stuff I can easily do. It's like podcasting, hour of, Jacob's ladder and sleds and all that stuff that's at 140 beats per minute. But for anybody that's trained really, really hard, you'll find that almost very challenging to do. Let's just put it that way. But I think that's a really good data to go look, you'll improve this whichever way you go there. If you get leaner, this will get better. So that means that find something you can stick to that's sustainable to get you leaner. And again, repeat sustainable, right? That you can do, and then add in strength training, exercise, conditioning, which we could kind of dive down the rabbit hole in. But because I want to leave that for the last thing. Before that, I wanted to just ask you, what are some, if you had to round up some of the biggest mistakes that you find. So as not only as a researcher, but as a coach, right? As a practical coach, the things that you see that are mistakes that clients make before they come to see you, or maybe that are even recommended through the mass kind of social media. What are some of the biggest mistakes, and what are the solutions, or should I say better approaches to changing your nutrition?
I honestly think that, there's so much information out there, and it's hard for clients and the general public to navigate it all and make sense of it. And so sometimes people can actually read too much. If they're reading a lot of stuff in the lay press, then they get confused. They find ways to confuse themselves. And an example that kind of falls in line with what we were just talking about is the idea of fasting increasing a phenomenon called autophagy.
Autophagy, yeah.
And autophagy is literally the word, it means self-eating.
Yep.
So it's the body's way to get rid of damaged cellular components, and in essence, just run better at a cellular level. So, okay. And autophagy is something that term is thrown around a lot when people try to justify the superiority of intermittent fasting. But when you look at the literature on this, autophagy is stimulated by a hypocaloric conditions in and of themselves. So if you're in a caloric deficit, you're going to ramp up autophagy, whether that caloric deficit is a daily caloric restriction, or whether it's an intermittent fasting type model, you're going to ramp up autophagy. Exercise, any kind of exercise, even resistance training, that ramps up, that stimulates autophagy, sometimes even to greater degrees than fasting, as we're seeing in recent research. And the thing about exercise is you're stimulating autophagy, but you're also causing various adaptations that are beneficial to longevity, like the maintenance of lean body mass and increasing of aerobic capacity, and a combination of those things. Whereas with fasting in certain populations, like let's say the frail elderly, would be a bad idea.
Yeah.
So with the effect of exercise on autophagy, exercise is a win-win. Whereas with fasting and intermittent fasting and autophagy, it can be a zero-sum game, or even like a lose-lose, depending on the population you apply it to. So the general population will read these blog articles and read various bits of media and say, okay, intermittent fasting, I got to do it. I got to fast because of autophagy, because autophagy is where it's at. And that is the completely wrong picture. Autophagy it's an algorithm. It's a physiological algorithm that goes on in the background. If you're focusing on autophagy, you're focusing on the wrong thing. It's almost like people focusing on insulin when they really need to be focusing on, okay, well, how do I maintain muscle, and how do I maintain good body composition while staying active? And so, don't read too much of the lay press. Okay. Be really careful about the information you take in and end up seeing as gospel. So that's a big mistake that the general population makes. And this is to no fault of their own, because where else are they going to get their information? Nobody outside of us practitioners knows where to go for the good information. So I would just caution the general public against that. And of course, the solution to that, I don't know, man, that's $1 million question. Read the right books. talk to the right people.
I got one I can recommend to you. Flexible dieting.
Thank you.
We'll put that one in the show notes. But you know what's cool that you brought that up, because I said earlier, and I said, hey, there's a new show on National Geographic, Limitless, right? And that comes up a lot. And I mean, look, it's been coming up a lot. Autophagy's been coming up left and right. And so now you're kind of shining a light and zoning in on something that may be true. Okay. But this is why this is so important. Like conversations like this is like, yeah, but you get the same thing with exercise, strength training, nutrition, caloric restriction, in whatever way that you get there. Right. And you're also getting that. So now people can go like, oh, okay, well, so you do get it through all these different avenues, not just this one, that we shine a light on, because you can essentially now, and I get it why they make shows, and how, it's like, we're trying to make this more interesting and do this, that, and the other. But it's so important that people get the source from the right folks and get all the data and options, right? Even just that, sharing that is for somebody to go like, well, shit, like I should just focus on caloric restriction, training, and getting some conditioning in, consistency, because if this happens, that's going to happen. I don't have to, kind of dive into this. And look, maybe it is somewhere down the line, whatever, we find more research and data. But I think the problem is like what you said, that people don't have success because they're going into stuff that's going to be less likely for them to be able to keep it sustainable. Right. And that's we want to prevent that as much as possible. Now, the thing is, the reason why I wanted to leave this for last, I mean, one, because I love training. It's kind of I won't say it's the main thing that we do, because I feel like if you don't coach nutrition alongside with training, like you're not really helping people change your life. But everywhere, even when the nutrition conversation comes up, it's like exercise is always built in. And there's so much research and studies that show the benefits of it that, like, I mean, we could do probably 10 hours straight on that. But nonetheless, like for anybody that's listening, could you just touch on, like, I would say 3 to 5 of the most important points of exercise, and may it be strength training or cardio, I think both are important. But when it comes to helping with nutrition, right? How exercise helps support the nutritional changes for people.
Okay. I want to tie that into something that I feel is really important for people to know. And it also relates to your previous question about the mistakes people make.
Okay.
So I think I can tie that in.
Awesome.
Most people in the general public do not have a realistic picture of how much muscle they can gain in a lifetime, let alone how much they can gain in like a month. Same thing with fat loss. Okay, so realistic rates of progress is a big stumbling block for people, because it's one of the big reasons why they will quit a program and to start trying to find something else and never stay consistent once they hit a plateau. And so knowing these rates of progress is a really powerful thing. And it really comes down to 1 to 2. Okay, so in the realm of fat loss, 1 to 2 pounds per week is a realistic goal for, you can say fat loss or weight loss if we're losing just body fat and not lean body mass. So 1 to 2 pounds a week is a realistic goal for most people who are trying to lose weight to shoot for, and that's per week. And of course, as you get leaner and arrive closer towards your goal, well, then half of that, cut that number in half. Half a pound to a full pound a week, plenty. As you get away from obesity, you go into becoming overweight to normal weight, half a pound to a pound a week, plenty. Same numbers with muscle gain, but on a monthly basis, right? So like a beginner can expect to put on 1 to 2 pounds of lean body mass a month. And as they go into the intermediate and certainly towards advanced stage, cut that down half a pound to a pound a month if you're doing everything right as an intermediate and certainly an advanced person. So when you have those rates of progress in mind, that's really powerful because it'll prevent you from prematurely quitting a program. And something really interesting to me that just looking at like how much muscle people can gain in a lifetime, like typical adult, if you compare the fat-free mass index of people with the largest amounts of lean body mass who are still lean, like the bodybuilding population. Okay, so elite level competitive bodybuilders, they have roughly about 25% more muscle. They carry about 25% more lean mass than the average untrained adults. And that's with men. It's about 25% more. So with women, it's about 15% more lean mass in the elite competitive bodybuilding population compared to untrained adult women. So in terms of absolute numbers, if men realize that in a lifetime of adult training, let's say a 10-year period, you may put on 25 to 40, possibly 50 pounds of muscle in your training career, then the numbers on an annual basis really kind of look pretty small. Like if you average like 7 pounds a year muscle that you put on, 10 pounds a year, you're doing really good in a 5-year training period, where you're at your prime and you're putting on muscle for the sport. And so when you think about, God, 7 pounds of muscle a year is amazing. And then you look at programs that promise like 3-4 pounds of muscle a month. Yeah, man. No, not really. Maybe at the beginning while you're just piling on a bunch of fluid and glycogen and water and stuff. But yeah, that'll level out really fast. And I think it's important for people to know that men, you are lucky if you gain, I want to say 25 to 40 or 50 pounds in your whole training career as an adult. And women, you're lucky if you gain 15 to 25 pounds above the average untrained woman during your training career. Those numbers apply to drug-free individuals. Just so you know. So when we introduce anabolic androgenic steroids and performance enhancing drugs kick those numbers up by like 20%. And then you're right around there. There's a guy named Nick Walker who won the Arnold, I think last year, it's 2021. And he posted a picture of him at 18 versus age 28. And there was 100-pound difference between his 18-year-old self and his 28-year-old self. Yeah. Drugs are a whole different thing, man. So the numbers I discussed have to do with natural trainees. But I think it's important for people to know those numbers and have those expectations so that they don't get demotivated through the process.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I wanted to make sure I got that through. So like tying nutrition in with that, well, gosh, where do we start, you know?
I mean, it's put it this way. The reason I bring it up is because for folks that are listening to, while there's a lot of coaches, there's a lot of fitness enthusiasts, but I always, you know, people share it a lot, is that for somebody that, you know, I would say, unfortunately, many Americans, many people around the world don't lift weights and don't exercise, is to really understand how important it plays into, I mean, every single goal that you have that has to do with health and longevity and like looking a certain way is going to have an attachment to strength training and some form of, you know, cardio exercise, right? Like, and that's why, but because I know that a lot of people are like, I'm going to change my nutrition, so I change my body. And it's like, great, you're going to sit in this car and you're going to drive away, but you're going to have 2 wheels, you know, instead of 4, or maybe even less, right? So that's my point, is these two things, you can't detach one from the other. But even in, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I know that there's a bunch of research that come out as far as training and satiety, that there is showing that when you train, it's one of the things that regulates satiety. There's also, I mean, just the conversation around lean body mass, one, to build it or even to maintain it, you know, you have to challenge yourself. And how is that, you know, how is that help you be metabolically healthy, but also, you know, how is it going to affect food, right? How is it going to affect food consumption, and where is it going to go? I mean, obviously there's the calories burned part, more lean muscle mass equals higher RMR and all those different things, right? Like, you can't detach them, but at least in your mind, what do you think are the 3 kind of like big pillars? Just like, look, you got to exercise. Here's why. Even like I said, when you're going on a nutrition plan, you got to add this too.
Yeah. Regardless of the exercise, just from a pragmatic and like a behavioral standpoint, you will be more compliant to a dietary program if you're, in essence, at least subconsciously knowing you're putting in sacrifice as far as the training part goes. So whether you dive into resistance training first, or whether you are doing more of like endurance, aerobic endurance type of training, or whether you're somebody who does both, just doing that, it kind of puts a safeguard on you not wanting to sabotage the whole thing, because you are putting a certain amount of effort and sacrifice in there. You're not going to want to, you'll have less of a tendency to actually undo it by maintaining a poor diet. So those things kind of work bidirectionally. So if you get into that routine of training and or physical activity that you enjoy, then you're going to be more motivated to have the nutritional side properly complement or fuel the exercise side. And so just from a behavioral standpoint, it's important to just have that in place. From a physiological standpoint, not to get into the weeds too much, but if you compare a group who wants to lose weight with just diet, you compare that group with a group of people who loses weight by increasing exercise. And so if you match the experiment up right, one group is dropping 500 calories a day, not exercising, and the other group is exercising, let's say 500 calories a day. They'll both arrive at the same spots, maybe from a body weight perspective at the end of the experiment. But the people who exercise are going to be building a myriad of physiological adaptations to exercise that make their fuel use a lot more efficient. And when I say efficient, I mean better, because you are increasing mitochondrial activity within the muscle tissue, and you increase the oxidative capacity of cells, and you can better partition incoming calories towards the lean tissue instead of the fat tissue, because the lean tissue is acting basically like this metabolic blast furnace for calories and fuels, and properly using it to maintain muscle, and your body fat will also be in check as a result. So you'll also, the exercising group will be able to reduce certain depots of fat in the body that put you at cardiometabolic risk, like visceral fat. So fat around the organs, fat around the internal abdominal cavity. Exercise keeps visceral fat in check, whereas just dieting doesn't necessarily do that to the same degree. And so you're changing body composition as you exercise. You're preserving or increasing lean mass. You're controlling body fat levels or even reducing them. And by doing those things, you are putting the right health investments in the bank for later on in life, when you're getting into middle age and beyond. And you're putting the right dollars in the bank for making sure your skeletal system is good as well. So bone health, mineralization, maintenance of skeletal health, so you don't get brittle bone disease later on down the line. So there's so many avenues towards maintaining good health and preserving good health through exercise that you just cannot get with controlling caloric intake and diet. They both have to be in place because they both complement each other.
Man, that's perfect. I mean, again, it's like I think both of us, one is, I mean, even if you read the forward for your book, it's pretty much like, I want to be able to simplify, evidence-based nutrition. And of course, you're including exercise in there because there's such a big component of everything, and spread it to the masses so that people are not as confused. It can do the simple things, and make it easier, because it's hard. Because if you're confused, it's hard, right? Like Donald Miller says this quote, I remember it for coaching. I remember it for marketing. It's like, when you confuse, you lose. Right. And it's true. Right. So, I think the confusion is at an all-time high. So I'd love to, have people on that like are great at what they do, both research-based, that turn it into practical, application. And let's get that spread out as much as possible, so that people are like, okay, cool. Listen, this makes sense. It's simple, maybe not easy, but you know what? Because it's simple, it's going to be easier for me now to do these things. And that's why I also brought that up, as far as like, to where folks can connect the dots and go like, look, maybe you're not going to start with heavy strength training. Start with something that you enjoy. Do Zumba, go running. I mean, like, as much as, 10 years ago, I'd be like, no, this is what's most efficient, whatever. Like, listen, if you're not doing anything and you start doing something, like, you're winning, you're progressing, and I'm all for it. And I have such crazy stories of, people where they started with their exercise journey and what led them to us here at Vigor Ground. I mean, it was all types of different things where they were like, they got more active, they felt better. And they're like, hey, I read something, I studied something, and I realized the importance of strength training. So I, found you guys. Right. So I would say discouraging. I think that's another problem that you can kind of see, right? Is like this discouragement of things that aren't, optimal, that fit pros will say like, that's not optimal. Yes, it is. It's way more optimal than not doing anything. And it should be encouraged. And there's a journey, right? And the journey may start here, but it's going to end in doing strength training and conditioning and whatever else it may be. So I just want to get that word out to as many people as possible, just like you do. So, with that said, look, man, I know we could riff on, like, I got another 22 questions, which, means we'll just do another show down the line for sure. Yeah. But listen, brother, like, if you don't mention it, but like, where can people find out more about you? I'm actually going to do a plug for some of the things that you do that I think are phenomenally valuable for well, a general population, but also for fit pros. But like, where's the best way for folks to find out more about you?
All right. So alanaragon.com is where you can get all my stuff. I do a monthly research review. That was the first one in the industry.
Yes.
And a bunch of my colleagues and students started their own, which are great research reviews. But I take pride in starting the whole thing. I just wrote a book called Flexible Dieting that's available everywhere from Walmart to Target to Amazon to.
This is what it looks like, by the way, if you guys are watching.
Yes, that's the beast. Yes, yes.
Phenomenal.
And for folks who just want to get their feet wet and just read my stuff, I've got an article page on my website. So alanaragon.com/articles. And I've got over 20 peer-reviewed articles in there. Most of them are free full text. So if you want to really just kind of, if you have a tough time falling asleep at night and you want to snooze a little bit, just crack that page open and start reading the articles. But yeah, that's where you can find me, is alanaragon.com. And that was a great conversation, Luca, man. I really enjoyed this, man.
Man, my pleasure. I will make sure that all of it is in the show notes, guys. So the link to the book, link to, like I said, I was actually on it for, I can admit that I'm not on it right now, but AARR, which is Alan Aragon's research review, and it is absolutely excellent. I mean, one thing I say is Alan puts a whole, pretty much, look, this is what it is, okay? You don't have to do all the research because this guy does, and then you just get the nice, great explanation of what's working, what's not working, and what you should be on top of. And if you're a coach, for the investment that you make, it's legitimately nothing to become better. So definitely, I mean, I'm from my own personal experience, I've consumed pretty much just about everything that Alan's put out. So make sure you get on that. We'll put it in the show notes. Thank you, brother. Appreciate you so much, man. This was a great conversation. And I definitely know we'll be doing this again in the future. And I'll keep you posted on any of the events that we have coming up, because I definitely like to have you out again for one of our events. Thanks, and man. With that said, my friends, make sure you spread the word. Like, if you heard this and you feel like it's been valuable for you, if anything, I ask to just spread the word. That's the cost of the show. The cost of the show is just spread the word. And we'll see you in the next episode of Vigor Life Podcast. Peace out.